Hey guys, today I am joined with Meghan Houle. Meghan is a Forbes ranked executive recruiter and master career coach. But beyond that, she has a podcast of her own called Pivot with Purpose, where she talks all about how to identify and navigate your next life and career move with confidence. And as she so accurately describes herself, she's a one stop shop for all things recruiting, professional development, and career pivots. So, of course, when I met Meghan at the Be Fearless Summit in New York City a few weeks back, I knew she was the perfect person to have on the show to talk all about how we can shift our mindset and approach around pivoting in our 20s, whether it be in your career or your everyday life. So, whether you've recently made a change, been wanting to make a change, or if you've ever experienced a change in your path, today's episode is for you. Meghan, welcome to the Unfulfilled podcast.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so honored.
Oh, I'm so honored to have you on. So, I would love for you to share a little bit more about your background and career path and what led you to what you're doing now.
Yeah, well, thank you for that beautiful intro. And yes, it was so wonderful to meet you. Shout out to Be Fearless and Alexa for bringing us together. And how amazing, with all these events coming back and this community building moment that we
Mm,
have now more than ever, thriving after the pandemic. It's been so life changing to show up in these rooms and like meet incredible people like you that are doing amazing things as well. So I am just thank you for that beautiful intro, and then thank you for the connection. And here we are. So, yeah, as you said, definitely a one stop shop for all things hiring, recruiting, and helping individuals at really all levels of their career get clarity and confidence in what is next. So, I definitely have a blossoming group of newly graduated professionals to CEOs and senior executives I work with and everyone in between to help navigate major life changes because let's face it, as much as the cliche goes, it's like, oh, work can't be life. For some people, it is. And for most people, yes, we do have to work and, kind of have that financial commitment to ourselves to be able to maintain the amazing lifestyles that we want to live. But yeah, I mean, I help on the recruiting side CEOs, founders, global brands at all level hire for their businesses across retail, corporate, and wholesale functions in North America. So think like beauty brands, lifestyle brands, fashion brand, consumer good brands, specialty brands, just some really, really awesome clients. I'm so lucky to have the clients that come to me for opportunities to help them build their teams, which I do not take for granted. I've been doing this for 2 decades, Camille, even though I got a lot of life left in me. But my background initially comes from the luxury fashion service world. So very early on in my career, I knew I just like love being front facing and
mm,
helping people. And I was like, what is that? So really early on took jobs, within retail and went to school for business and just this whole like business building sales world really just always like spoke to me because
mm,
I think from a consumer point of view it's so interesting to me on what that consumer spend and like how they react in environments where a clientele program is set up really well. Like I'm sure when you walk into stores and you're taken care of, or like people genuinely feel like you want to be there, or it's a
mm.
brand that you love and you show up and it's a great experience, you're coming back. And then we all know, there's definitely brands that have some work to do. So for me, all encompassing, yeah, being on the side of it now where I get to recruit from a world that I used to live in, I think makes me very credible. So that's a pivot there of like really knowing what you're good at and then using that to make a meaningful move. Yeah, and then on the flip side, building this coaching business where I get to work one-on-one with executives and professionals, like I said, at all levels, help them navigate those scary changes with a forms ranked recruiter in your back pocket that has prepped thousands and thousands of people in our lifetime. You kind of get a big bang for your buck working with Meghan Houle at all levels. So that's where I started. That is the messy middle. And like here I am today. And I got a lot more to do, girl. We got a lot more to do, you know?
Absolutely. It never ends. I
Yeah.
love that you had your own major pivots in life as well. And it sounds like from where you started in the beginning, even though that wasn't your end all be all passion, destiny, calling, it taught you what you love doing. It led you to where you are now. And so I would love for you to touch on how and how important any single experience is at any age or any stage in your career is to leading you to where you need to go.
Yeah. I think at a moment in time, you're going to start to have this burning urge that something that you're doing today is not sitting right or not
Mhm.
in alignment. And I always say, don't get to a point of frustration or like severe burnout where you become super highly emotional and almost like frantic, Camille, of like, I got to make a change. I got to get out of here. And then there's a very different energy that's put behind it
Yeah.
versus being super strategic in waking up and being like, okay, like I enjoy what I'm doing. Maybe I've had conversations with my boss or my superior and I've told them about my goals and maybe there's succession. What does that timeline look like? Maybe there's not.
Mhm.
Maybe they're like, "Hey, listen, like you where you are for now." I think a lot of people work in environments where senior leadership have been in their roles a very long time, and you
Yeah.
can see sometimes succession is probably like not possible for you. So no one's going to decide your future if it doesn't serve them. So, first and foremost, because we deal with this a lot when I'm helping people navigate resignations, is like no one's thinking of you, and anybody in your same situation is going to make the same move. So, you have to be a little selfish,
Yeah.
as loyal as we are, to say, like, what do I want to be doing with my life? What am I really good at? What am I doing now that feels good? What am I doing now that maybe doesn't feel good? And hone in on those hard skills that you own to be able to then sit down and strategize what you want to be doing, what you don't want to be doing, and making that pivot. So for me, throughout my entire career, all I was doing was hiring and staffing. That's it. Plus running multi-million dollar stores, running teams from like 20 to 60 plus at any given time. And with that, I mean, there's always a hiring need, right? So I remember, being in a very prestigious role within LVMH at Louis Vuitton, running a global flagship where I'm based here in Boston. Yay. And I was like, I don't think this is it for me anymore.
Mhm.
The store pace, the lifestyle, the schedule, for all those things. I'm like, I had some major life changes and I'm like, I think it's time for a career change. So I really honed in on what do I love to be doing? Okay, I know
Mhm.
I don't want to be here in the store, but I do love building teams.
Mhm.
And what does that look like? So, you sit down and you're like, yeah, a job as a recruiter absolutely exists. And whether you want to go in house and work for other brands, I decided to go on the agency side, but I really took a step back and, kind of focused in on that zone of genius
Mhm.
that I wanted to own. And from there, girl, you got to put yourself out there. Like we can say all these beautiful things out loud that we want to do to pivot. But if you don't talk about what you do and why it matters and how it can serve somebody, no one's going to do it for you and no one's going to know what you want to do unless you tell them. So I started to get very loud and strategic, not loud and like screaming from the rooftops, although fine, I'll do that too. But just like very loud and strategic with, I would say, the consistency of my voice as the loud in positioning myself in front of people
Mhm.
that I knew could maybe move the needle for me for those goals that I wanted to achieve to make a meaningful move. So you have to identify what you want and don't want. You have to hone in on that zone of genius of
Mhm.
like where you think like unequivocally you can come in with confidence and be like, if you hire me, I will do this for you.
Mhm.
And then get out there and build a network of support around you. Truly, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You touched on so many great points there. I love how you acknowledge that we have to be our own advocates, especially at these big companies that a lot of us are working at in our 20s. They're feeding you the Kool-Aid. They're like, "Oh, but if you stay X amount of time, you'll reach this level and then you'll be happy or then you can have this opportunity." And they just keep feeding it to you. But at the end of the day, that's corporate and that's serving them. And I think that's really hard to step away from sometimes. So I love that you pointed out we need to tune in and do what's best for ourselves, regardless of any, bridges we may burn in the process, because it's our life and career at the end of the day. So that was a great point. And I also love how you acknowledged that you need to tune into what you do love in your current situation and your strengths in order to guide you towards the next steps. So in your journey, you knew that you loved the sales side, but you started to step away from retail. So obviously that probably didn't look like you going straight from retail to being this Forbes ranked executive recruiter, right? There were probably a lot of steps you took in between to get there. So let's say you have that feeling. What you're currently doing isn't right. You know, okay, I'm pretty good at these things, but not so great at this, or I don't love these things. But let's say you have no idea where you want to go next. You don't know what you're passionate about. Okay, I know my strengths, I know certain things I like. What do you recommend to people who just simply have no idea what the next step looks like even though they might know some strengths? How do they how do they start to figure out where to go next? What their interests are? What does that next step look like?
Yeah, I think you have to sit down and just get quiet with yourself and
Mhm.
do some soul searching. It's really like asking yourself those hard questions like, what is my purpose? Like, what are my values? Like,
Mm.
what legacy I want to lead? And I think sometimes, listen, it's so hard early on in your career. First and foremost, anyone in those juicy 20 years, like, try all the things, please. Like, by all means, I feel like at different levels. Now, the environment in the world that we live in is not solely subscribed to the fact that you're only relevant or loyal if you're in a job for 5 to 10 years. I
Mm.
actually feel like that can hinder and hurt you because if you're not changing, challenging, evolving, you're not growing and learning as a person. And, sometimes we don't have those opportunities early on in our lives to have the money, maybe to invest, later on in life where people like join communities or masterminds or can invest in a coach that can help you get there. So you want to work with other teams and individuals that can show you different things and different ways. And you're like, oh, maybe, this wasn't for me, but like, I'm going to try this, even in your own company, speaking up your voice and saying, like, hey, I know I'm on the product side, but I'm super passionate about marketing.
Mhm.
You I will counter that with you to say to anyone listening in, you do know what you like and don't like.
Mhm.
And I think that's where it comes in, where, there's so many external factors of people that love to share their opinions with us, Camille, of what we should be doing with our lives, or like, oh, you have such a stable job. Why would you ever want to leave that? When I called my family and said I was leaving like a prestigious executive leadership job with an LVMH to go to an agency recruiting role and get $0 and be 100% commission. They're like, "Are you unwell? Like, did you have a stroke? Did something happen?" And I'm like, "No, I believe in myself." Because no one's going to believe in you more than you. But that confidence, trust me, I know can take some time.
Mhm.
But I think you have to sit down and start to ask yourself the hard questions of like, who do I want to become? What do I want to be known for? What am I really good at? Ask like some of your college like friends or roommates or family members or colleagues like, "Hey, when you think about me, what comes to mind? Like
Mhm.
what 3 adjectives would you describe me?" Or if I wasn't in the room and you were talking about what I do professionally or whatnot, like, "How would you describe me?" And I
Mhm.
think like that's pretty eye-opening too, because that's the perception that we're putting out in the world, right? As we're all our own little personal brands walking around. Everything we do ties back to kind of who we are, whether we show up on socials, who we are professionally, to our core. We certainly have specific values, likes, preferences. So I think those are some really good exercises, but I feel like it's really sitting down and spending some time with yourself and kind of these cues around you of like, okay, if I'm not liking this or what I do, like why? Why do I feel like this is like not aligning for me? Is it the team? Is it the culture? Maybe you could be doing something you hate because of the people and you could do it in another company. It could be amazing. So it takes some time and some quiet moments to quiet out the noise, the external opinions of others, and just get really clear with ourselves, like intentionally, internally. And there's like so many books and like so many great things that you can like read to help guide you. Again, where I know sometimes these investments in a coach or somebody that can get you there couldn't not be possible right now. But I think there's a lot more resources now, more than ever. Definitely more than what I had early on in my career. But alas, the failures that I have had are now benefiting others today, where I've walked the path and I can show individuals, maybe how to do it a little easier. So we all go through things for a reason, right? That's what makes us who we are.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more, and
Yeah.
it's important to shed light on the fact that regardless of the experience, it's teaching you something, and I love that you touched on the more experiences you have, the better. The more new things you try, the better, because that's the only way you're gonna learn, and
Mhm.
it can be uncomfortable, and that's a huge thing I love to talk about in the podcast is, like, leaning into that discomfort because every single transition is uncomfortable, but growth only feels uncomfortable. Like, growth never feels comfortable, and so I just think I'm so glad you touched on that, that the more experiences you have, the better. And
Yeah.
you also great transition just ended with the fact that your failures have taught you and now you're able to share those with others. So, I would love to talk about how we shift away from the mindset of failure into the mindset of opportunity. So, how were there certain things that you saw in your career as failure in the moment, but now you look back on as blessings?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that, well, first of all, like, you can't be everything to everyone.
Mm,
I think that's a big, like, and for anyone who is sitting in a very people pleasing mindset or way about them. I'm the first child, the only girl out of four. Of course, I wanted to make everyone happy, be the athlete, be the best in like school and all of this.
mm,
And I think sometimes early on, we are groomed to be the best and perform at the highest level possible at all times. Y'all, that is not sustainable. And I
absolutely.
think that definitions of failure can be different for everyone. I don't see them as that. I see them as opportunities. So for me, I think the biggest thing that I learned early on was like learning how to navigate people in
Mm,
a work environment where, I took on very much at your age a huge leadership opportunity where at 26 years old, I was managing a $15 million multi, state territory at 14 stores. Honestly, Camille, I had no business having this job. Like truly. I showed up to like the owner. I was like, I want to be a district manager. And at the time, he was like, "Sure, yeah, we need you. You're good. You work well in the store. Like, go ahead." And I was like, "Okay, great." So, I thrusted myself in with a zero guidance roadmap of
mm.
like knowing how to navigate relationships, having tough conversations, wanting to make everyone happy and, yes, whatever I can do. And, to the detriment of me, because if you're taking on all the responsibility and like all the heat, like you're actually not teaching others like how to be the best versions of themselves if you're just trying to like do it all and whatever. So, I think very quickly early on, I learned that you have to set boundaries. I mean, especially for anyone evolving in a people sort of management position, you do not need to be friends with everyone. You're not there to make people's lives easier. You're there to do a job, and anyone in this day and age, especially, is going to test you at all levels. I mean, even for somebody in a senior leadership role, like maybe someone's listening in right now and they have a terrible boss.
Mm.
I've had terrible bosses. I mean, I've had bosses to the fact where I've gotten like hurt and injured at work, and they're like, "You're fine, just like keep going." And I'm like, "Okay, I guess
You're
not.
like, "No, I'm
Like,
literally need to go to the hospital."
understandably, for yes, like, all those Netflix shows, the Abercrombie, all the things, like, y'all, that happened, like, the late '90s, early 2000s, unhinged, like, they would not last an hour in the asylum that they raised me, truly,
Oh my
thank you,
god.
Taylor Swift, but I think, like, that isn't a failure, it's just a recognition of something that and I think, like, this brings clarity of, like, okay, like, I don't wanna manage people, and I
Mhm,
don't wanna have those tough conversations, or you kind of flip that and say, like, I probably could have handled that better situation. I mean, there's a lot of managerial situations or conversations I probably could have handled a lot better with a better outcome. But like sometimes it's trial by fire. And if you don't have mentors like helping to guide or show you the way, or actually individuals in your company that want to see you succeed, I would say like that should be a red flag to you right now to just be like, okay, am I failing because it's something that is me, or have I not been set up for success?
Yeah, maybe it's more of the environment, and maybe that's a learning opportunity. This environment isn't for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow, that's a
Yeah.
great point.
Yeah. It's not always about you. And I think we so make it about us because other people make it about us. But then you're like, is that true?
Yeah,
Have I really been set up for success? And I think that's sometimes why people don't last very long in jobs because you're thrown into a position, right? And the onboarding is really crappy. Or you're just like left to your own volition and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm new here. And you figure it out as you go. And then you're like, oh, well, I didn't do that right. I didn't do that. I'm like, nobody taught me. At some point, yes, you have to embrace the learning and like, self awareness. But I think unfortunately in this day and age, a lot of people are not set up for success too. So I would recognize those things in what you're doing.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And that leads me to the idea of detaching from this identity around our careers. So, background that most of us have experienced is that we go to college, we pursue a major, we start down a career path. And we have this idea because we're fed this narrative that we have to have this like 5 to 10 year plan. This is where I hope to be in 5 years. This is where I hope to be in 10 years. I know at least like back in school when they asked me to like craft my like 5 or 10 year plan, I was panicking on the inside
Yeah.
because
You're
I'm
like,
like,
what do I
I
do?
don't know. Like, what, like, I don't want to be an accountant for longer than like 2 years. Like, what do you mean like a 5 or 10 year plan? So
Hmm.
I so agree in that we're not set up for success because we are fed this idea that our career is our life, first of all, and B, it's like a long term path, and you should stay on that same path. And I think it starts to become this whole thing where our career kind of becomes a part of our identity. Like, you go to a bar and people are like, "What do you do?" That's like the first question
Totally.
out of their mouth, and I'm just like,
Yes.
I'm so much more than my job, but our society just makes us feel like we're our job. So when we make a change, I would love your take on how we can detach from this loss of identity that we might experience when we pivot, because we might have thought our future looked like one thing and now it might look totally different when we make a pivot.
Mhm.
So, what's your advice on that?
Yeah, and I will plug, and if you wanna put this in the show notes, an amazing book you guys should read listening in is this book called On Brand, written by my very dear friend Eliza Licht, which is all about shaping your narrative, shifting your perception, owning the vision of like your career and that last name syndrome, right? And that's what she talks about in this is like absolutely when your name is tied to a company, a job. And Elisa goes through this because for years and years, and just like me, she was also in a fashion brand where you're like, oh, you're Elisa from, this company, or oh,
Yeah.
you're Megan Houle from Louis Vuitton. I'm like, no, actually, I'm Megan Houle.
Yeah.
Let me tell you what I'm really
Period.
passionate about, right? And actually, I just completed a triathlon a couple weeks ago. Thanks for asking. I
Oh,
mean, I think shifting it to because like that's a societal thing, right, Camille? Like that's what we were trained like properly and professionally. If you're going in people, in front of people, like what do you do? And trust me, like that dreaded question is like, tell me about yourself. Like, oh my gosh, that's something I help people prep in an interview where I'm like, you have to like rein that in because there's so many different directions. But, instead of like a job, I always say, like, flip it and like, hey, this is what I'm really loving right now. This is a project that I'm working on. I'm sure you talk about your podcast and you're like, sure, what I do, maybe 9 to 5, or I know there's a huge rise in entrepreneurship of people like looking to build brands and businesses. You can really shape that narrative of yourself by detaching yourself, just from something that you're doing on a daily basis and putting in a bigger bucket of, I love to support, philanthropic businesses and I
mm,
volunteer a lot and I have a podcast and I love fitness community. And I think that like there's so much community in that community of someone being like, oh my God, cool. Like beyond what you do for work, like, oh, you work out here or you do this or oh, you have a podcast, so do I, and like there's where the linking connections are. So who we are and show up professionally, like, sure, it's important. It's not going to define us.
right.
Your job's not going to define you. Like, your legacy is the, I think, impression that you leave on every individual that you come in contact with. So
Mm,
I think allowing people to be in your space and being a kind human, being empathetic, seeing people, listening to them, like all of those things are just who makes us who we are, right? So I definitely highly recommend reading that book. And then I also recommend maybe try this out on your next weekend adventure out in a bar. It's like if someone's like, "What do you do?" You're like, "Actually, like, let me tell you about what I'm really loving right now,"
right.
and see how that goes,
Do you wanna know how I
and
pay
just
the
flip
bills,
that
or do you wanna
script,
know what I
right?
like?
That's been really helpful because absolutely, you're like, for so long you can get so attached to working for a company, and that's what I tell people, even on LinkedIn, like, flip your job header of like, Megan Houle from this company to Megan Houle, recruiter, brand builder, strategist for luxury brands, boom, and just
Yeah.
make it more about like the actual pillars of the value add versus being connected to a company.
I love that. I think key takeaways there, like what you do to pay the bills and your main means of income doesn't have to define you, which is so huge. And I think it all comes down to mindset, is just shifting out of that mindset that you are your job. And
Mhm.
I think too, I love that you touched on, I think the more experiences we have and the more that we do outside of our 9 to 5, the less attached we are to it, right? It's like, again, going back to the bar example, let's say you're out in a bar and people are like, tell me about yourself, and or interview, whatever. I don't know. I just like go straight to the bar. They're like,
Same, like, or both, or
like
but
it's
don't
more
go to the bar
interesting.
and then an interview. Do the
Yeah.
opposite first.
Okay, so
Yeah.
we're gonna stick
Yeah.
with it. So we're in a bar. So
Okay.
talking with someone in a bar, they're like, "Tell me about yourself." If the only thing you have to say is, "I work at XYZ company," then yeah, you're probably going to be pretty attached to that label because it's kind of all you have going for yourself. But like you said, what if you, okay, yeah, I work at this company, but I also, okay, I'll take my example. I teach yoga. I have a podcast. I volunteer every week. If you have all these other things going for you and other experiences in life, I do think it makes it a lot easier to detach from one singular quote career or
Mhm.
job or whatever,
Mhm.
because that's not all you are. If you add more to the bucket, one
Yes.
thing in the bucket almost just gets blended in with all the others. And it kinda that's more of who you are, It's like you're not one color, you're a whole rainbow of, like, different colors.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah, and I think
but
that, to that will help, like, so say if you're talking about you teach yoga or you kinda teach fitness at the side, maybe internally that's a pivot you wanna do, and someone's like, "Oh my gosh, like, I know somebody in, like, the fitness space that's looking for new help," or whatever, like, "Would you ever think about you absolutely have no clue where a conversation can lead, depending on, like, the environment that it's in,
yeah,
but, like, allowing somebody to walk away leaving an impression of you that you're not just this one thing. There's all these like buckets. Like maybe you could be nominated for, a speaking engagement or brought into like, a brand fitness partnership or whatever. Like you don't know. But again, like no one's going to know what you do unless you tell them. And don't shy away from sharing the personal things because I do feel like it just makes us so much of who we are. So just throw that extra tidbit in.
100%,
Yeah.
and that leads me to this idea of imposter syndrome. So, how have you worked through this idea of imposter syndrome? You were sharing that example of when you were a manager, but you felt like you were so young to have all these responsibilities, and I'm sure that came with a lot of imposter syndrome. How did you navigate that, especially at such a young age?
Oh god, because I was in, like, fight or flight survival mode. You're like, "Megan, if you don't do this, like, it's gonna be in and you're gonna be in trouble." But, no, I think that I don't know if I subscribe to, like, fake it till you make it,
Mhm,
because I think in there somewhere still is going to be these massive limiting beliefs that are gonna cripple you in a fear-based situation where you're just not gonna show up and you're gonna shut down and, like, you're going to become unwell.
mhm,
So for me, I think that you can't control what you don't have, but you can hone in on what you do.
I love that.
And in the do is where you build the confidence. And I think it's also owning the fact that we are not experts in everything. And if we also are starting new, not being an expert in something and saying, That is a great question. You know what? I'm going to get an answer for you
Mhm.
and I will get back to you soon. And I think building credibility and not trying to fake it till you make it, not trying to make up a scenario, not trying to make up your own laws,
Right.
compliance policy, but like finding the facts to be able to come back and keep that level of stoic like respect for like,
Mhm.
okay, they're owning their self-awareness of like what they know and what they don't and being so confident in the fact like I know when I was showing up for those store visits every day, like, I'm gonna make people feel good. I'm gonna compliment them. I'm gonna be like, you know what, you guys, you had a great day yesterday. And I think any managed team, like, like making the people around you feel good in general is like a huge plus to get out of imposter syndrome of like, cool, this person's someone we want to be around. And, sort of honing in on the things you can touch. And, if there are things that come up that you're not going to know, embrace the unknown because there's so much learnings in that, even in the failures, like we were just talking about. I mean, I was scared as heck when I put my podcast out there 4 years ago, when I made a pivot to being a career coach, when I coached my first person and I wanted to like give them a refund. I'm like, I'm so sorry. But also
Are you
on the
sure
other
you wanna
side,
give me your
right?
money?
I was like, here's your money back. But the other person on the other side was like, oh my God, this is the best information I've ever had.
Yeah.
You also can't put that and project that out that like someone on the other side of it is not going to not know better, but like you could be the best thing that ever happened to them. Like
Mhm.
stop holding yourself back from not knowing it all. Be an expert in what you can do and learn as you go and ask questions if you don't know. I mean, that's the best way to like tackle that truly. Because we all have imposter syndrome, everyone. There are some people who are like, no, not
Oh, we
me.
all
I'm
have
like,
it.
yes, you do. Like, relax.
There
It's just about the unknown and the scariness of navigating that. But we have a big worldwide web and world out there where there's so many opportunities to learn and grow and invest in ourselves that for wherever you want to be, you just have to be strategic of like, okay, if I don't know something, what's the best resource for me to use to like even feel more confident in what I'm doing? Yeah.
I truly love that advice. And one thing you said offline that I really loved too is why not you? You know, and I think that's such a quick and such a powerful mindset shift is why not you though? And another thing I want to tack on to that is in the Mel Robbins podcast, she talks about this in one episode and it just stuck with me ever since. It's just embracing this idea of being a beginner. You don't have to
Mhm.
enter whatever it is, a field, an industry, a hobby as a pro. You can enter as a beginner. And if you embrace that, it erases the imposter syndrome because you're not trying to be at the top of the field when you start. You're starting at square one. And so I think that really helps with the idea of imposter syndrome too, is accepting where you're at, accepting what you do know, and accepting
Mhm.
that there's so much to learn. So I think
Mhm.
that that's a great shift as well. And talking about this prior experience and entering new realms leads me to the idea of if someone wants to make a pivot and their resume totally reflects the industry they were previously in.
Mhm.
But let's say they know they want to do something totally different. Like let's say they want to go from being a lawyer or something like that to working in fashion. Like clearly there's like a lot of disconnect going on there and they might not have any experience in passion, but they might have had that internal feeling that we've been talking about, that gut feeling that says, I want to pursue passion. How do they jump from one to the other without that prior experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it's like going back to finding in that like messy middle of like what that bridge is going to look like and
Mhm,
all the twists and the turns to get there. What can you hone in on to sell the heck out of
mhm,
for a company you're going in front of why they should hire you? Because, and as I said this at the Be Fearless event, like a job description is a wish list
mm,
and let's not let us apply to things where we are not checking the boxes for non-negotiables. Like if there is an absolute like hard skill, a systems, a programming, coding, computer science, languages, there are things that like if you don't own that and you're just like low key applying unhinged to like jobs just to like see what you're going to get, like you're just going to continue, you're going to go down a spiral of like rejection
mm,
because there are some things that companies are not going to concede on. Those are like, we need this for the job. In those other things, it's like, okay, lawyer, fashion, Fashion law.
Mm.
Getting it onto
Is
the
it bridged?
paralegal side. Yes. Of coming in and saying, finding who's on that legal team. I mean, there are so many fashion lawyers. I mean, and also like agencies that support fashion lawyers that, or fashion brands, under counsel that, finding a way to kind of get a foot in the door. Now, if you're a lawyer and you're like, oh, I want to burn it all down and all that school and the LSATs and Elwoods and everything and get onto the floor of a retail, I would say amazing, but I think that at some point, you'll get the eyes open wider like, are you sure? Like, are you sure this is what you want to do? And if in your gut, you're like, hell yeah,
Mhm.
then you need to show up and make it not about the narrative that someone's going to say to you of like, oh, you're overqualified or, oh, this is what we think, but like pitching yourself,
Mm.
pitching yourself as to why you think this is the right time, opportunity because of the experience that you had. Maybe you love being on people. Maybe you love closing deals. A lawyer is probably a really great negotiator. I think like there's so many things that we will own true to us from a former job that we can show up and bring to something if it's a huge major pivot. But just like we were talking about, like you're probably going to start at the bottom. You can't say like, oh, I'm pivoting from here and I'm going to be like, the next CEO. And again, going back to our point, like ego is what is the downfall of anyone coming in thinking they know it all, where it's the opposite of imposter syndrome. And we probably have all met those people, that come in and fake it with the ego and ego significance, like all those things, like you're not going to last. So put your ego aside, take a bite of humble pie and show up and be willing to learn. And bottom line, just be like a really amazing person people want to work with.
Mm.
In this day and age, that culture fit, those soft skills, someone's going to take a chance on you if they're like, okay, this person's cool. I want to work with them. They seem reasonable. They're not demanding like
Mhm.
14 weeks of PTO like off the bat. They're not rewriting the job description. Because honestly, Camille, like I've had people I've worked with, candidates that are like, I like this job, but like we need to take a couple of these like job profile points out. I was like, honey, no, we're not rewriting the job description for you. Like, this is what is, girl, please. There's like wild stuff going on all the time. But I think it's just like really, aligning and subscribing to like, cool, this is the job. I know I can do it. If you're feeling a certain way, let me put your mind at ease and let me tell you why I'm the best person for this job.
Yeah.
And I think you really have to hone in that. But again, that takes confidence and it takes time to really sit down. Like you can't wing that. You please don't anyone just start winging like I'm going to make a pivot and then starting to apply to all these jobs. Like again, like you will get rejected in this day and age. So you want to be strategic with how you're positioning yourself because that is also your reputation too.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe
You know?
combining a healthy amount of confidence with reasonableness,
Yes.
like a healthy amount of risk. Because I think taking a risk is hard in general, but maybe it takes the pressure off if it's okay, you're not taking a risk by diving off that 100-foot cliff over there and seeing what
Right.
happens. It's you're taking a calculated risk, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
like you just spoke to, confidence is so important. And that circles me back to that idea of networking is so important. If you can embrace everyone you know, embrace the city you're in, embrace meeting random people like the Be Fearless Summit. I met incredible
So
women.
many.
It like
Yeah.
you included, obviously. Like it's just amazing how even just in conversation with someone, you can make a connection. And so I think that's another great tool is talk to people in the industry maybe you're interested in,
Mhm.
and that can maybe you just learn something from them, or maybe you make a great connection and go work for them. I just think you
Yeah.
never know, and talking to people in confidence, I've found can be so, so effective.
Yeah, it really is. And I would say to anyone, a great exercise listening in is like sit down and like think of 3 people
Mm.
that you would love to know or that you would love to have mentor you. And what is the saying goes, like we all need to be a little delulu with the side of audacity
Yeah,
of like, am I afraid to reach out to Oprah? Heck no. But is that like a little like delu? Sure. But like shoot
a
your
healthy
shot.
amount. What are
Shoot
we
your
talking
shot.
about?
And I know we were talking about before, shoot your shot because I think we also are so good at holding ourselves back of like, oh, if I go in that room, I'm not going to meet anybody or no one's going to want to talk to me or who's going to want to get to know me. But I think the path that you're looking looking to go and that you desire, sometimes best is led by somebody who has been there. And just like I said, my failures are, your gains. Find a mentor, find you a mentor that is not a family member or a friend or somebody in your current business. Like find some people on LinkedIn that you think would be super cool to
Mm,
get to know. Maybe they wrote a blog, maybe they have a podcast, maybe they were written up in an article, maybe they have a cool business. Like send them a compliment. Hey, I love what you're doing. I would like love to share my insights on X, Y, and Z topic, or I would love to like tell you about some of the takeaways I got from your podcast because I think it's amazing. Like, can we meet up for coffee? Are you free to chat, on Tuesday at 9 or something? And I think like making connections through like a genuine sort of authentic, whether it's a compliment or, just even like a call out, the power in putting yourself in front of people that can, again, open doors or
yeah.
say your name in a room of opportunity. You guys, it's so magical. So if you're not putting yourselves in new rooms, you're doing yourself a massive disservice.
That's a great point.
Yes. Yeah.
So, going back to the example of you make that pivot, maybe you switch industries and accept entering a few notches down or lower down in the totem pole. Obviously, that risk probably is going to come with some more financial instability. You might be taking a huge pay cut, and that is what keeps a lot of people in their current job. It's like, oh, it's financially stable and reasonable. And it can be really hard to step away from that, especially in today's economy. So, what's your advice when it comes to taking a step down financially?
Hmm. Well, maybe first I would say, is there a way that you can turn that pivot into like a side hustle first?
Mm,
See if you even like it. It depends, like whether you want to do like full time podcast or full time media or maybe full time fitness or whatnot. Maybe start to create like opportunities for yourself on the side
yeah.
to like see what that financial, sort of looks like for you and if you even like it. So, like, that's kind of one. I mean, a lot of people have this like amazing product based business where they're like, oh my gosh, I think I can go out and like sell this product and be a
Mhm.
brand, but I'm unsure. Like, go to the Seaport pop-ups, like, see if you can get pop-up space, like open like a direct to consumer channel on ecom, like set up a Wix website for like super cheap and like start selling stuff and create a brand. Like, I think like there's so many things that we can do in conjunction with
Mm,
like a full-time job that could lead us down that path. But on the flip side of it, I would caution anyone to take too many steps back financially in this day and age, unless you truly feel like there's like a security savings or you're like really trusting yourself and you see this like super clear path
yeah.
to like very streamlined growth. Because at the end of the day, like you don't want to put yourself in a moment where you've taken this job and now immediately you're in this like scarcity mode. Right. Of like, I'm not embracing this new opportunity because I'm like, wait a tick, like, I'm not getting paid unless you're totally going to sit down and say like I can cut this out of my budget right now. I'm going to make these concessions in my lifestyle so I can make this work for me because I do see the opportunity in it. But I think for some people too though, Camille, like compensation and the currency has flipped a bit too. Is it work from home? Is it fully remote?
Mm,
Are you not going to be like going into the city like 25 days a month paying for fare or cab or whatever? Will it give you a chance, maybe if it's fully remote, to move out of a really expensive environment and be somewhere, try a new city, new opportunity? So that's all currency as well. Maybe there's great benefits. I think a lot of people now are working sometimes in places where the benefits are really crappy. And then you're doing the math and you're like, oh my God, I'm actually paying so much. So I'm actually making this. Like there's all different ways you can girl math it. But I will say, unless it is a dream job,
mhm,
you know, 10, 15K down with maybe better bonus structure, with maybe more work from home flexibility, better benefits, fine. Um, but I would caution anyone in this day and age to make like a super big financial cut because then it just becomes, unless you're set up for it, it can start to feel very heavy. And then
yeah.
you almost are resentful of it.
And then
You
maybe
know?
adding on to that whole experience conversation you're
Yeah.
talking about, like, you should find that bridge, maybe find the financial bridge too, like, maybe it doesn't mean jumping straight to that job that will be a huge cut, maybe it's just, like, taking steps to get there so it's not such a drastic thing. Or I love the comment you said, like, side hustle.
Oh, yeah.
100%. Like,
Oh, yeah.
who says we can't do things on the side that we love? And then it takes pressure off our full time job too, you know?
Mhm. You can be this and that, everybody.
Yes, exactly. It is not your identity. Full circle, full circle. Okay, last question for you, Megan. What is your biggest piece of advice for your 20 something self?
Calm down.
Amen.
Girl, you better calm down.
Amen.
You need to just, like, chill out. Like, are you trying to be Olympic gold medalist or, like, we trying to live? Enjoy life.
Yeah.
Stop living in the, sort of mindset of how you feel like others want you to live and show up.
Mm,
Do what you wanna do and do it unapologetically. Find your voice. And if you have a absolute trash network around you of friends that are, creating bad habits for yourself, bad lifestyle choices, get rid of them. Do a friends edit. Who's sucking the life out of you? Who's the energy vampire? Who's always that one-sided friend that's calling you that's never giving something back to you?
mm,
I would rather have and I do, like, I'm like, "I have no friends." I'm just kidding. But, having a circle of people you're either gonna have a circle or a cage, right?
mm,
As we grow, as we expand, there's either gonna people that are gonna cage you in to the version of you that they wanna see that's serving them, that's never gonna serve you, or you breaking out of that cage and having a circle around you, and it can be very small, of those, like, trusted people that you can have real conversations with, not surface people, not party people, not people that are keeping you out and, like, allowing you to, like, not move forward with your dreams and goals. But I think, like, surrounding yourself with really good people. I wish I knew that. I definitely was in a very toxic situation in my 20s, bad relationships. Like, focus on yourself, calm down, and stop being everything to everyone. And it took me a long time to, like, really step into, like, who I am, because I was just living not in the present, but for, like, who a version of, the person that other people I think wanted to see.
yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, tremendous advice.
Right?
Megan, thank you so much. This was so amazing. I loved absolutely everything we covered, and I learned so much myself. So thank you so much for taking the time and for coming on Unfulfilled.
Thank you, and I'm so excited, and I can't wait to get you on my podcast too.
I
Stay
can't
tuned,
wait.
everybody.
Coming up. Stay
Coming
tuned.
soon.
All right. Thanks, Megan.
Thank you.